Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to my second vMix training session. This time we're going to go into vMix audio, but this time in dark theme. I've upgraded my slides. So today we're going to cover audio fundamentals, routing and mixing, as well as some practical applications. The point is really just to give you a foundation so you can creatively build on it for whatever your needs happen to be. Before we begin, I would like to point out a few things. Please remember that this is a beginner training, and some of you probably know some or most of this stuff, but it's vital to go over the fundamentals because, it's how we learn. Also, if anyone has any questions at any time, please feel to interrupt me to ask it. I don't want to just steamroll through this without anyone being able to get their thoughts in. So let's go. First up, we're going to talk about terminology. Basically, what do words mean? What do words mean? What do the terms mean? How do we understand them and use them correctly? Now, this isn't going to go over all of the possible audio terminology, but it's going to go over audio terminology that you might use while using vMix and also more broadly at the same time. But this is not an all-encompassing list. If you want to learn more terminology, Wikipedia, definitely your friend. There's a ton to learn out there. So first, we're going to be talking about audio channels. So an audio channel is pretty much just a single waveform. Virtually every audio source you hear on a computer is a two-channel or stereo audio stream, meaning one entirely separate channel for the left and right sides. All of music, radio, Twitch streams, etc. have at least two channels of audio. Mono always means one, stereo always means two. You can always add more channels, like 5.1 surround sound is 5 channels of audio plus a subwoofer. Even though in many formats the subwoofer has a dedicated audio channel, it only gets a 0.1 to represent it. So things don't always make perfect sense. Things are named weird. You just kind of get used to that. Let's go over a few points. An audio channel is usually a single waveform. Stereo means that there's 2 channels of audio. Sometimes when people say channel, what they really mean is 2 single channels in stereo. So you might hear someone say 16 stereo channels, which is actually 32 single channels. But I mean, everyone that works in audio knows what that means. So it's just kind of faster to just reference things quickly. And there's so many audio formats out there. But if you ever see a 0.1, that pretty much always means a subwoofer. Some audio formats don't even use dedicated channels. Like there's some crazy Dolby stuff that maps audio in 360 degree space and uses some math to determine what audio should go to each channel. It's pretty wild stuff. But so I mentioned waveforms, but what's a waveform? Well, a waveform is just how we represent sound. Sound is just a pressure wave, both negative and positive pressure. In this image here, you can see a pressure wave mapped over time. This is an audio waveform. This is sound. All sound is just pressure changes in the air. Some like to say sound is wiggly air, but that's really all there is to it. Speaker pushing out equals positive pressure. Speaker pulling in equals negative pressure. Do it fast enough and you have audible audio. Digital audio is exactly the same, but represented as discrete digital values over time that then get mapped to a smooth waveform when played back. Next up, audio buses. What's an audio bus? An audio bus is essentially a signal path that can be used to combine individual audio signals together. Think of it like 2 or more rivers flowing into each other to create one large river. In this case, the Monongahela and the Allegheny River flow together in Pittsburgh to create the Ohio River. Well, it does flow into Ohio after a while, but it's in Pennsylvania first. So maybe it should be called the Pennsylvania River. I don't know. So the 2 audio streams flowing into each other is useful because it allows us to control audio in groups instead of just individual sources. For example, you could route all of your talent microphones into a single bus, and then when you change the volume on the bus, the volume of every talent member changes in unison. Of course, you can still go in and adjust individual volume of every input independently, but a bus gives you quick adjustment and flexibility that you so often need in a live situation. For comparison, how is audio done in OBS? In OBS, every audio source has its own volume control, and every audio source goes straight to the main output, or in audio terms, master. This would be the same as not using any of the buses in vMix and routing all audio straight to master. Reasons audio buses are powerful. 1, group processing. Audio buses allow you to effectively group multiple audio sources together. Once grouped, you can adjust their volume or apply effects all at once. This saves time and keeps your mix organized. 2, multiple mixes. For example, when I do an online show, I route very specific audio sources to bus F, and then I set that bus as the audio source for the low latency multiview. And that allows our staff to hear exactly what they need to hear. Like it allows the staff to hear the talent even when we're on break, even though the stream can't hear them. It also makes it so the talent, so it makes it so the staff doesn't hear the ads. The staff doesn't need to hear, the music, stuff like that. Things they don't need to hear, they don't get. So it's very, very useful. I'll also route exactly what the talent needs to hear to bus G, and then set the vMix calls to listen to bus G. The third reason is resource savings. This is more of a focus when doing music production, but having audio mixed in a bus allows you to apply a single effect to everything in that bus on a single audio waveform, rather than apply numerous separate effects to different inputs. In the world of music production, where you might have a whole orchestra of instruments, the savings can add up super fast. But it's still somewhat relevant in vMix, although you shouldn't really need to worry about it because the amount of plugins and effects you'll be using will probably be mostly minimal. Next up, decibels. What even are they? Well, you probably already kind of know. Decibels are a measure of sound energy. You've heard stats like a concert can be 130 decibels, an AC unit is 80 decibels, etc., etc. Decibels are a good unit of measurement because they exist on a logarithmic scale. What do I mean by this? The vertical axis is sound pressure, and the horizontal axis is decibels. As you can see, decibels scale exponentially. Every 10 decibels feels about twice as loud to us, but in reality, the energy doubles every 3 decibels and the sound pressure doubles every 6 decibels. So if a non-technical person tells you to cut the audio in half, negative 10 decibels is about what you would want. In digital audio, you may have noticed that the maximum loudness is always 0 decibels. This might be a little confusing because outside of digital audio, 0 decibels means absolutely no sound whatsoever. And then the scale just increases from there. But because of the relative nature of digital audio, we need a ceiling that always remains the same no matter the audio format. So instead, we use 0 as the maximum loudness, and then we use negative values from there to represent audio levels. And to represent absolutely no audio, we say negative infinity. So a digital audio signal that's, measuring at negative 8 decibels of loudness is 8 decibels quieter than the maximum achievable audio level in that audio standard, which would still be pretty loud. But what happens if we hit that 0 decibel ceiling? Well, that's our next piece of terminology, clipping. What does clipping mean? Clipping is when a signal gets so loud that it reaches the ceiling of possible values for that digital or even sometimes analog audio format. A digital audio waveform has to fit within whatever standard we create. Here's an example of clipping. When we amplify, or rather increase the power of this signal, you can see anything close to the top or bottom of the waveform gets completely maxed out. Where there used to be beautiful audio data has now been squashed into a flat line. This is clipping, and it sounds really gross when played back. It's basically, we ran out of audio values to represent audio this loud, so we're just stuck with the loudest one, which is always 0 decibels. If you want to learn more about digital audio, this is a good article from Isotope. Let's go over what a fader is. You've all seen faders. Faders is a sliding control device. In audio, that means volume control. Slide the fader up to increase volume, slide it down to decrease. Faders exist in many types of applications, from audio to lighting, video editing. They can even be remapped away from volume into something completely different, like the threshold on a compressor. Not that you would usually do that, but fader always means some form of increase or decrease, control, or scaling of some type of value. They're pretty simple. Next, what is solo? Solo, smuggler, scoundrel, hero. Han Solo, captain of the Millennium Falcon, is one of the greatest leaders of the Rebel Alliance. He and his co-pilot that's the wrong side. Solo. Audio terminology. Yeah. Okay, that's the right one. What does solo mean? Solo means listening to something by itself. Every audio input and bus in vMix has a solo button. When you click this button, you will have all other sounds muted and just that audio piped into your headphones volume. This will pop up the big yellow solo button in the top middle right of the vMix interface. You can then click it to disable all solos. This is actually a fairly new feature that used to just not appear, and if you couldn't hear something, you would just have to figure it out. But that is a nice feature to have. While soloing an input, nothing changes about the master output audio to stream. However, it will mute your master output in your headphone output. You will then only be able to hear the inputs that you actively have set to solo. If you solo a regular input, not a bus, it doesn't even need to be on for you to hear it. However, when soloing a bus, all of the inputs already need to be on and routed to that bus for you to be able to hear them. You can also solo multiple inputs at the same time by right-clicking the solo icons instead of left-clicking. This will mix them all together into your headphone output. Here's a real-world example. We're doing an esports broadcast, and I want to see how loud the gameplay audio is before we transition into game. I don't want to blast the viewer's ears off. If I go to my gameplay audio and click S for solo, all of the other sounds of the stream will go away, and I will just hear the input. I'll adjust the volume as needed, and when I click solo again to stop listening to it. As soon as I stop soloing the input, the master audio comes back, and I can hear everything again. I want to stress that nothing changes about what goes out to stream when you click solo. Like, please don't freak out thinking the audio suddenly cut out, because I can assure you it did not. I also need to stress that when you solo an input, it does not mute it to your output, so you need to make sure the audio is now not on or routed anywhere that it's not supposed to be before you solo it. There's definitely been times where me or other people have tried to solo something, didn't realize it was routed to stream, blasted the audio all the way up, turned the solo off, and oh no, it's still on and blasting into the stream now at full volume. So be careful, but it's extremely useful to just check on an input, listen to it. Sometimes things have happened where I've been doing a broadcast and one of the staff members is like, does that streamer have music in the background? Because we were pulling in Twitch streams at the time. And so initially I was like, I don't think so. I don't think I hear anything. But, I click solo, I turn it up, and then sure enough, I could hear the music in the background. So I was extra careful about that stream because I didn't want the main stream to get a copyright strike or get muted on Twitch. All right, now let's go over general vMix audio stuff now that we're done with all the nerdy terminology. vMix has 7 audio buses that you can enable, A through G. By default, only A and B are enabled for some reason, probably to make it feel less intimidating. I recommend that you enable all of the audio buses since there's really no downside to having them available should you need them. Plus, you won't break any presets that were built with more audio buses. To route an input to an audio bus, you can simply click the letter. If it's not master, A or B, you can right-click on the A, B, or master buttons to get a drop-down list where you can select any remaining bus to route that input to. You can route an input to as many audio buses as you want, although generally you'll only do 1 to 3. It really depends on your setup and how you're designing your mix or your other mixes for your other outputs. Why is the audio sometimes blue and sometimes green? When the audio is blue, that means the audio exists and it's coming in, but the input is not on. The speaker icon on the audio determines if the input is on or not. When it's on, the audio level will turn green to reflect that. As a reminder, an audio input can be soloed even when it's off, which is, like I said, very useful. Now let's go over all of the audio input settings, and this will be probably most of what we talk about here today. There are 2 areas of the audio settings that do not change. They stay docked while on any settings tab. Actually, first I should mention that to get to these settings, you click the little gear icon that's on the input panels. I don't know what you would call each of these. They have faders and buttons on them, but each input display. Let's call it an audio input display. Yeah, the little gear there, right here. When you click on that, you get to this menu. You can also get to this menu by going to the main input area and clicking the gear on that, and then going to audio input settings. That is also an option. But yeah, there's two areas that stay docked while on any settings tab. They are the pre and post audio meters. So pre means the audio levels before any effects or volume control, just how loud the raw source is. Post means the audio level coming out of the input after volume control effects, things like that. The checkboxes on the bottom that also stay docked on every single tab. Visible in mixer means the input will be visible in the audio mixer. So if you've unchecked this but want to get it back into the mixer, then you'll need to go to the regular input settings among the main vMix inputs, go to general audio settings where you can re-enable it. So let's say you have an input that let's say you have a video file and it's just video. There's no audio to it. An audio input will still appear in the mixer, an audio panel, but it's just taking up space because there's, let's say there's no audio in the video, right? It's just taking up space for no reason. So unchecking visible in mixer would definitely be useful there. But if you accidentally click it on something you want and it disappears, sometimes it can be like a little moment of, oh my God, how do I get my audio input back? I need to be able to change the volume on this thing, and now I can't. So yeah, you can always get back here by going into the main inputs, going to the settings, general audio settings. For if you currently have an input routed to stream and something sounds kind of weird, but you can't increase the volume to check it without the stream also hearing the increased volume. But with solo PFL, you can just toggle that on, solo the input, and bam, you can hear it at full volume and you can make sure everything's okay. So very useful if you have like gameplay audio that's at, I don't know, let's say you have it turned down by 20 decibels, minus 20 decibels, but you want to, it's too quiet to be able to hear if there's like distortion or problems. You want to hear it full volume, put that on, solo it. It'll be very loud, but you'll be able to hear it completely clearly. Meters pre-fader simply means that the audio meter is not affected by the actual volume of the fader. If you remember like just a couple minutes ago where we have the pre and post audio meters, it essentially just skips the post audio meter entirely and always uses the pre value for the audio meter in the audio mixer. I wouldn't really recommend using this settings as it makes it harder to know what your true audio levels are at a glance. The headphone volume control sets how loud this input will be in your headphone output. So if you don't want to hear the ads quite so ear-shatteringly loud during breaks, you could totally lower the headphone volume of that input. But I would also shy away from changing this just because you really want to hear things accurately. Unless you're outputting your master audio to a different audio device that you toggle between so you can make sure that you're hearing things accurately, I would just keep all of these at max just because it can be dangerous to change a bunch of these settings and then suddenly on stream something might be way too loud or way too quiet and you have no idea until someone in chat is like, why are my ears bleeding? And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. So ideally you want to hear the stream the way the stream hears it, because that's just how you mix audio. You are the one making the decisions. Now let's go over the general tab of the audio input settings. In the general tab, you will see quite a few options. Format is listed at the top, it just displays your sampling rate, the bit depth, and how many channels. So 48,000 hertz, 16-bit, 2 channels is very, very standard. That is probably 99% of what you're going to work with. Some music might be 44,100. Some videos might be exported at that sampling rate. It doesn't matter. vMix will convert it. You won't even notice a thing. It all sounds good. You can select how you want to control the channels. Under channel, you can select all or separate mono. Separate mono makes the audio routed from this input mono, but it allows you to select how much from each channel you want. This is useful, say, if your talent's audio is only coming in on the left channel. This is a pretty simple one-click solution to make it mono. Gain simply allows you to boost the volume of an input if needed. Automatic gain control can be useful if you have an audio source that changes volume over time, but given that there are absolutely no settings to control how this feature works, I would recommend using a compressor with manual settings most of the time for better results. However, it can be useful if you just need a quick fix for someone's volume being too high or too low. Delay can add or remove delay from the input, but it should be noted that for live sources like SRT feeds, RTMP feeds, any audio captures, things like that, negative delay does not do anything. Negative delay is mostly useful in fixing synchronization issues on pre-recorded media. Because you can't go into the past, live sources are stuck at being the minimal buffer at most. But you can always add delay, which is sometimes super useful. I've had some pretty weird setups. I was working an event recently where they had this NDI setup and the video was just so delayed from their audio. So I just kept having to delay the audio so it would match the video. At one point, my audio was delayed like 700 milliseconds. And it wasn't super pretty because when the talent would talk to each other, it just sounded so delayed. So it was just, you make do with what you got. And I ended up finding a better solution halfway through the stream, but it's there. It's useful. It's a good feature to have. The plugins tab. Plugins are your standard VST plugins like you would use in a digital audio workstation for producing vMix. These can be incredibly powerful, but I would advise against relying on them too much as they can create instability. But they can be incredibly powerful for getting some fun effects. You could add standard things like EQ and compression, sure, but you could also add like a vocoder or fake connection drops or other fun stuff that could actually be used for content for a stream. Your plugins are arranged in a chain, top to bottom, with each one feeding into the next. The arrows on the right side are used to arrange the order. The Show Editor button just opens the currently selected plugin's user interface. Press the plus button to add a plugin. Press the minus button to remove the currently selected plugin. Not much to it there. If any of you have used plugins, you'll know that the world of plugins is vast, and there's so much you can tap into. EQ. This is the vMix built-in EQ plugin, effectively. It's a pretty standard 10-band EQ and can be used to improve audio on any source you want. If you need a refresher on how an EQ works, towards the left side are your low-frequency sounds, and towards the right side are your high-frequency sounds. Each fader represents a slice of the frequency spectrum that makes up the range of human hearing. 10 bands isn't really a ton, given that we don't have any adjustable properties for them, but it's enough most of the time for most things. The numbers along the bottom notate the center frequency of each band of the EQ. We can't change the settings and we don't know all the details, but generally each frequency band is a curve with the frequency listed being right in the middle. Imagine a normal bell curve, but the middle of that bell curve being the frequency. We're also boosting the frequencies around that one in the shape of a bell curve. So here's a GIF of a more modern EQ frequency band working. You can adjust how wide that curve is. You can see exactly what frequencies it is boosting. In vMix, we're just kind of stuck with what we have. We don't get to choose the exact frequency, the exact gain, or the exact width of the band. We're just stuck with who knows what settings they have. From my experience, it sounds like a pretty generic, fairly narrow band. What's called Q on that GIF there. So the first band, frequency 31, will be extremely low bass. Think like the lowest bass line of a song, but not even like a bass instrument, like an 808 subwoofer shattering deep bass sound. Most of the time for broadcast, that's not really going to matter other than like, I don't know, maybe the explosion of the bomb in CS2 or pretty much just explosions, or if you're listening to music, the bassiest of the bassiest 808s. The bottom end of the kick in a nice subwoofer. 62 will be still pretty deep bass. Think the bottom range of like deep male voices or the bass instrument. 125, more like the standard low end of human speech. Increasing this might give more of that deep low end of human vocals. Think like the Markiplier kind of sound. 250 gets more into the lower mids, more into like human speech, guitars. As you go up the frequency spectrum, adjusting the bands will sound completely different. All the way up at 16K, you've got the noise of making like an S sound, like this of that, or the sound of like a shaker. Music producers often call this frequency range air because it tends to increase sounds that sound airy in quality. There's really only so much I can say about an EQ because you really need to get in there yourself and figure out what sounds good. But generally, up in the 8K and 16K range, if those are up, we generally associate that with something sounding higher quality. We're able to hear the details on someone's S's and plosives more clearly. And of course, the lower frequencies boosting that adds a little more richness to the bass. And we tend not to like the sound of mid frequencies. If you remember the trend of Beats headphones, it's what we call a V-shaped EQ. When you boost the left and right sides and lower the middle, it's fairly pleasing of a sound signature to like the average person, but it's kind of lazy. It's not very thought out. It's like a cheap, easy way to make someone that doesn't really know a lot about audio think something sounds good. Because I hear a lot of bass, I hear a lot of detail, but that's all you hear. You miss out on all of the mids that can still be important and interesting to the sound. Anyway, let's keep on going. Compressor. This is another one of the built-in vMix plugins. It's also much more basic than most compressors in audio tools, but it's still useful to have. Ratio adjusts how much compression is being applied. Threshold adjusts at what volume level compression starts happening. If you're looking for a very compressed sounding mix, you can set this very low and then boost the gain up to make up for lost volume. Or if you're just looking to tame some of the big peaks of human speech, like shouting, to prevent clipping, a decent ratio with, -10 threshold should be mostly sufficient. All a compressor really does is rapidly control the volume of an audio waveform to reduce its dynamic range. So, reducing how loud the loudest parts are for the most part. I would also highly recommend reading more up on compressors because they can be vital to having a good sounding audio source, especially when it comes to human voices. We all know Markiplier. I just mentioned him a little bit ago, but his voice with like a little bit of a bass boost and a little bit of a compressor on it, it's just, you don't need to do much with his voice, but so rich. And whatever effects chain he's got going on his mic, it's beautiful. Noise gate. The vMix noise gate is a pretty simple noise gate with, again, many of the settings stripped out for simplicity. I kind of wish they wouldn't do this. I want to see these settings exposed. I know I can always use plugins. I can use third-party plugins, but I try not to just because they use more resources and they're more likely to crash. So I tend to just use the built-in vMix ones. You simply set what decibel level you want the audio to start coming through. Anything lower than that, and the input will stay effectively muted. This is useful for when you have talent with a lot of background noise coming through their mic. This is a quick way to make their audio only come through when it reaches a certain loudness, like when they start speaking. There are better noise gates than this super simple one, and you will likely have better luck from a VST-based plugin rather than this built-in system. Yeah, I guess I sort of said that twice. Channel mixer. The channel mixer is pretty simple. It allows you to adjust the volume of the left and right channels independently. This is useful if you have an audio source that has unbalanced audio. I don't know how people do it, but sometimes clients will send me videos where the audio is quieter in one channel. It's very bizarre. I don't know how they do it. I couldn't do that I could do it if I tried, but I've never accidentally only sent audio in the left ear or only accidentally sent a video with audio. It baffles me every time, but these are the tools to fix some of those problems you run into. Now for the channel matrix. The channel matrix is a way to remap audio channels. Having something mapped in the channel matrix does not mean it is routed in the mixer. It's just a simple way of setting the path each channel will take if it gets routed in the mixer. By default, every channel will follow the standard left-right pattern. Channel 1, left, of the source audio is mapped to all of the left channels it could possibly be routed to. And the same is true for channel 2 and all of the right channels. You generally won't ever need to change this. Yeah, you shouldn't generally need to change this in standard use. You should still use the split mono feature in the general tab if you need to make something mono, but in rare cases, you could route the left channel of an audio source to the left and right channels of its destination bus. Let's say a video has terrible crackling in the right channel, but the left channel is fine. You could just unroute the right channel and route the left channel to both the left and right channels of its destination. So that way it would be mono and it would be the same exact audio in the left and right side for the audience. You can also set and load presets of different channel routings. But the cool thing is that vMix does support more than 2 channels. As you can see here, there are 3 stereo channels coming in that could be mapped anywhere. SRT supports multiple audio tracks, and in this example, I was streaming with 3 of them enabled. This can be super useful if you want to capture audio sources at the same time, but want to send them all in sync over a single stream. Think things like player comms, different on-site microphones. The options really are endless, and this is mostly applicable to online streams, because in person, you'll probably just, hook up to a mixer and have like a Dante card where you have like 64 channels of audio. Oh yeah, I said something that I wanna reference again. Just like when people say channel, when people say track, usually that means multiple waveforms within a track. So if someone says, yeah, we've got a 1-track recording, that's probably 2 audio channels in stereo, generally speaking. I know sometimes little things in terminology can get lost and be confusing. All right, next up, the last tab of the vMix audio input settings is the bus mixer. This feature is actually brand new, and I'm extremely glad it exists. It does 2 things. 1, it creates a full layout for routing any input to any audio bus without needing to right-click. So, not that it's very hard to right-click. It's the only place in vMix that actually shows you what everything is routed to in real time, since there's just not enough room for all of the buses on the little audio inputs. 2, and most importantly, it adds the ability to independently control the volume of the input going to each bus. By default, they will all be at max volume. But I would try not to rely on this feature too much. There may come a time where you have an audio issue, you forget that you had levels set differently to each bus, and now you can't figure out why things sound quiet. But I think this feature will be very useful for lowering the volume of a certain input to the talent's ears on the fly. Talent says gameplay is too loud, quick fix to lower it. I would still recommend using the audio routing for talent that we went over during the last training. It's a much better solution. Speaking of, let's review that. Because this is audio training, I wanted to take a second to review the audio example I went through during the general beginner training. Since now everyone has been brought up to speed on how to work with audio, I figured we should look over it one more time, but this time with no simplifications. An extremely useful feature in vMix is the ability to add an audio bus back in as an input. This allows you to do some cool stuff. Let's say we have 2 gameplay cameras on our broadcast and we are routing all our gameplay through bus B, and then from bus B to master. If the caster calls are set to hear bus B, and I want to turn up their audio, like the casters are like, it's too quiet, I can't hear it, I would need to turn up the gameplay audio for the entire stream. So, that's not very good. You can see if I turn up bus B, turns up the audio to the whole stream. Not super fun. So what I can do instead is add bus B back into vMix as a brand new input. From there, I can route it to any bus I want and control that bus's volume independently of bus B. This is a technique I use in every single one of my online shows, and it's incredibly useful to have set up ahead of time. Just allows me to create a little submix to send to the talent, can adjust it on the fly. It's kind of perfect, and what the stream hears is not affected whatsoever. In vMix, there are 4 outputs. Audio can be routed to any of these outputs using the output settings. There's a gear next to each one of the 4 vMix outputs. There's a bunch of settings in here, but in this training, we really only care about the audio channels dropdown. In this dropdown, you can see that we can set any bus as the audio source for that specific output. We can also send multi-track audio. That's what MA, MAB, MAC, MABC etc. is for. You generally won't need to use this, but it could be useful for certain applications, such as when you need someone else to mix your audio for you on another vMix machine, say like somewhere else in the world for an online show. But each letter in that dropdown represents an audio bus, and you're just sending multiple channels of audio all at the same time. Looking back, all right. So we learned about terminology such as channels, waveforms, audio buses, decibels, clipping, fader, solo effects, plugins, EQ. We learned about all of the audio options and what they do in vMix. We learned how to route audio to suit our needs, and we learned about audio outputs and how to route audio to them. So that's it for this training. Thanks to everyone for attending. Make sure to join the Discord so you can catch these live, and we'll see you in the next one.